São Paulo, Brazil, March 28, 1993. Ayrton Senna has just won his home Grand Prix in the rain in a car that had no business winning anything, while 100,000 Brazilians scream his name. And in the middle of the greatest ovation of his life, Senna, the most feared driver on earth, does something strange. He goes looking for an old man, 81 years old, 5 world championships, a man who had spent 4 decades quietly judging every driver who came after him. Senna finds him and, in front of the world, wraps him in his arms. 13 months later, one of these 2 men would be dead, and it would be the wrong one. To understand why that embrace mattered, you have to understand who Juan Manuel Fangio actually was, because the numbers alone sound like a typo. 5 world championships, with 4 different teams. He won nearly half of every Grand Prix he ever started, a strike rate no driver has come close to in 70 years. And he did most of it in his 40s, in cars with no seatbelts, in an era when racing drivers died so often that Fangio said he stopped counting the funerals, which raises the question this entire video hangs on. When a man like that talks about greatness, when the maestro himself, across 40 years of interviews, keeps returning to the same handful of names, who made the cut? Because Fangio never wrote a tidy top 5 list. He did something better. He spent his life passing a torch from hand to hand, era to era, and telling the world in his own words exactly who deserved to carry it. 5 names, 5 torches. The first one belonged to the only man who ever made Fangio feel like a student, Alberto Ascari. If you're American and you've never heard the name, here's the fastest possible education. Across 1952 and 1953, while Fangio was recovering from a broken neck, Ascari won 9 consecutive Grands Prix he entered, a streak of dominance that stood untouched for over 60 years until the hybrid era finally caught it. Fangio didn't hand out praise. Interviewers spent decades trying to pull rankings out of him, and mostly failed. But Ascari was different. Fangio spoke of him the way you speak of a rival who kept you honest, the man whose precision, he admitted, could beat him on a pure lap. When the 2 of them shared a track, you drove differently. You drove afraid of being second. And then came the 4 days that broke him. May 1955. Ascari crashes into the harbor at Monaco, sinks with his car, and swims out alive. The whole racing world exhales. 4 days later, testing a friend's car at Monza, a track he knew like his own heartbeat, Ascari goes out for 3 casual laps. He never comes back. Fangio was left holding a torch with no one to race for it. He would spend the rest of the decade looking for the next hand worthy of it. He found it in a 25-year-old Englishman who was about to become his shadow, Stirling Moss. 16 Grand Prix wins, 0 championships. And according to the man who won 5 of them, that 0 is the biggest lie in the record books. In 1955, they were teammates at Mercedes, and Moss did something almost nobody alive could do. He stayed on Fangio's gearbox, lap after lap, race after race. The press called him Fangio's shadow. Fangio called him something else, the man who, in his eyes, absolutely deserved to be world champion. So why wasn't he? Here's where it gets almost painful. In 1958, Moss lost the title by a single point, and he lost it because of his own honesty. When his title rival was about to be disqualified from a race, a disqualification that would have handed Moss the championship, Moss personally testified in the man's defense. He got his rival's points reinstated. Those points beat him. Fangio never forgot that, because this was the secret criteria the whole list is built on, and it's the thing casual fans get wrong about him. He wasn't ranking speed. Everyone at that level is fast. He was ranking character under pressure, judgment. What you do when winning would cost you your soul or your life, which is exactly why the 3rd torch went to a shy sheep farmer from Scotland who barely spoke above a whisper, Jim Clark. 2 world titles, 25 wins, and ask almost any driver of the 1960s, a talent so smooth it looked like the laws of physics had made an exception for him. And here's the part American viewers should know. In 1965, Clark came to Indianapolis and humiliated the field, leading 190 of 200 laps to win the Indy 500. the first driver ever to take the 500 and the Formula One world title in the same season. Fangio, by then retired for years, watched it all, and when he spoke about the generation after his own, one name kept surfacing above the rest. Clark, he acknowledged, was the class of his era, the natural heir. Different machinery, different decade, same rare species. But this list has a curse, and by now, you can feel it coming. April 7th, 1968. A meaningless minor race at Hockenheim, Germany. Cold. Wet. Clark's car snaps off the road into the trees at 170 miles per hour. No barriers, no chance. The safest pair of hands in the sport, gone in a race that didn't matter. Drivers across the world said the same sentence that week. If it could happen to him, none of us are safe. One of them decided to actually do something about it, and that decision is what earned him the fourth torch, Jackie Stewart. And before anything else, understand this. Stewart was fun. The tartan cap, the rock star sunglasses, the sideburns that deserved their own contract. He palled around with Beatles and movie stars, talked faster than he drove, and charmed American television so completely that for a while he was the face of Formula One in the United States, all by himself. 3 world championships, 27 wins, a showman with a killer's consistency. But behind the sunglasses, Stewart was carrying a number no entertainer should have to carry. During his career, a driver racing full-time for a decade faced roughly a 2 in 3 chance of dying in the car. Stewart went to more funerals than weddings. In 1966, trapped in his wrecked car in a Belgian field, marinating in leaking fuel while officials stood around holding cigarettes, Stewart made the decision that made him hated. He was going to drag this sport into the age of safety, kicking and screaming. They called him a coward for it. Track owners banned him. Fellow drivers mocked him. Fangio understood him completely, because here's what most people never knew about the old maestro. His single most famous piece of advice wasn't about bravery at all. Fangio preached winning at the slowest possible speed, taking the least risk that still gets the job done. Survival as an art form. Stewart wasn't a coward. Stewart was Fangio's philosophy with a Scottish accent. The two men became genuinely close. Stewart made pilgrimages to Argentina. Fangio treated him like an heir. Stewart has spent 50 years telling anyone who'll listen that Fangio was the greatest of all time. And when interviewers pressed the aging Fangio on the modern era, the respect flowed straight back. But there was one name, one that made the old man's eyes change. The final torch. And this is where the story stops being about racing. Ayrton Senna. If you only know one Formula One driver, it's probably him. 3 championships, 65 pole positions, a man who drove in the rain like it was a personal conversation with God. What the world learned later is that Senna, the icon, had an icon of his own. He'd grown up on stories of the Argentine master, and when they finally met, something rare happened between the most intense driver of the modern age and the calmest driver of the old one. They recognized each other. Fangio said it out loud more than once in his final years. Of everyone racing in the modern era, Senna was the one, the greatest of his generation, the heir. Senna, for his part, publicly ranked Fangio above everyone, including himself. Which brings us back to São Paulo, March 1993. Now you understand what you're actually looking at in that footage. This isn't a photo op. This is a torch being passed in front of 100,000 witnesses, the last of the 5, the 81-year-old judge, and his final verdict, arms around each other while Brazil roars. 8 months later, in Adelaide, Senna would win his 41st Grand Prix, his last. He stood on that final podium and even pulled his bitterest rival into an embrace, as if some part of him was closing every account he had. Then came May 1st, 1994, Imola San Marino, Lap 7, Tamburello Corner. The world watched it live. In Argentina, an 82-year-old man reportedly reached for the remote and turned his television off because he had buried too many friends in his lifetime to watch another one die in real time. 3 million people lined the streets of São Paulo, the same city, the same streets where Senna had embraced him 1 year before. And there, grieving among champions young enough to be his grandsons, stood Juan Manuel Fangio, The master burying the student. The torch had come back to his hands. And there was no one left he wanted to give it to. 14 months later, July 1995, Fangio died in Buenos Aires at 84. Not in a car. In a bed. The rarest ending his generation of drivers ever got. So there it is. Not a list scribbled on a deathbed. Something more honest than that. 5 names spread across 5 decades of the maestro's own words. Ascari, the rival who kept him afraid. Moss, the champion the record books robbed. Clark, the natural. Stewart, the survivor who thought like he did. And Senna, the one he loved. But here's the thing you may have already noticed. There's a 6th name missing from this list, the one name every other driver on it put first. His own. Fangio was asked over and over for 40 years, "Are you the greatest?" And he refused. Every single time, his answer became the most famous thing he ever said, that you should always strive to be the best, but never believe that you are. 5 titles, 5 torches, and the only man in history great enough to leave himself off his own list. Maybe that's the real reason, 70 years later, we still call him the Maestro. If this story moved you, the comment section has one job tonight. Who carries the torch today?